Welcome to Talk 2. About a year ago, I dropped my phone in water. I won't trouble you with the details, I expect you can imagine. Despite every effort involving hairdryers and bags of rice, I couldn't get it to work and decided I really had to get a new phone, and fast. Now, usually when I get a new phone, I take a son along to the shop to act as interpreter. Unfortunately, no son was available, so I had to go solo. I thought the saleswoman was very helpful. What I didn't realise was that despite her fairy godmother impression, all her explanations about how she was saving me money, she actually was a kind of piranha, quite successfully flogging me the latest, most expensive phone on the market. Boy, did I get into trouble, especially with my sons. And of course, ever since, there has been the clear inference that I have a phone which is far too sophisticated for my needs. Well, now at least that I'm filming with it, perhaps I can regain some dignity, just a tad perhaps. But it's true, I'm sure I've got all sorts of fancy features on my upmarket phone which I probably have not explored. Probably there are all sorts of labour saving, eyesight rescuing, efficiency increasing, entertainment providing features I have yet to explore. I'm sure there's much more to it than I've currently discovered. From my boys' point of view, it's wasted on me. But no, I'm not going to let them have it. These unexplored riches remind me of people we all know who have great resources at hand and have not yet recognised them. People who have computers at home, but fear to turn them on. People who've been given perhaps a wonderful vacuum cleaner, but by somebody they hold a grudge against, and so they refuse to use it. People who own a sports car, but won't ever get it out of the garage. People who have access to a really wise mind, but are too proud to actually ask for advice. Paul is trying to bang heads together as he writes to the Christians in Corinth. They've been squabbling over which leader they follow, which one is superior. I follow Paul, I follow Apollos, I follow Peter, they've been saying to one another. And finally, in this chapter, in chapter 4 of 1 Corinthians, Paul gets to the crux of the problem. You've missed the heart of the matter, he says. He doesn't sugarcoat his message either, as you'll hear. He's basically saying, you've got treasure available and all you can think about, all you're obsessed with is the sawdust that surrounds it. Let's hear from him now. And you might want to pause the video to go and fetch a Bible. And then find 1 Corinthians chapter 4. Now I'm going to jump a few verses as I go, but I would recommend reading the whole chapter later. So here we go, from the Message version. Don't imagine us leaders to be something we aren't. We are servants of Christ, not his masters. We are guides into God's most sublime secrets, not security guards posted to protect them. The requirements for a good guide are reliability and accurate knowledge. It matters very little to me what you think of me, even less where I rank in popular opinion. I don't even rank myself. Comparisons in these matters are pointless. I'm not aware of anything that would disqualify me from being a good guide for you, but that doesn't mean much. The master makes that judgment. Jumping on to verse 6. All I'm doing right now, friends, is showing how these things pertain to Apollos and me, so that you will learn restraint and not rush into making judgments without knowing all the facts. It's important to look at things from God's point of view. I would rather not see you inflating or deflating reputations based on mere hearsay. For who do you know that really knows you, knows your heart? And even if they did, is there anything they would discover in you that you could take credit for? Isn't everything you have and everything you are sheer gifts from God? So what's the point of all this comparing and competing? Verse 9. It seems to me that God has put us who bear his message on stage in a theatre in which no one wants to buy a ticket. We're something everyone stands around and stares at, like an accident in the street. We're the Messiah's misfits. You might be sure of yourselves, but we live in the midst of frailties and uncertainties. You might be well thought of by others, but we're mostly kicked around. Much of the time we don't have enough to eat. We wear patched and threadbare clothes. We get doors slammed in our faces and we pick up odd jobs anywhere we can to eke out a living. When they call us names, we say, God bless you. When they spread rumours about us, we put in a good word for them. We're treated like garbage, potato peelings from the culture's kitchen, and it's not getting any better. Verse 18. I know there are some among you who are so full of themselves they never listen to anyone, let alone me. They don't think I'll ever show up in person, but I'll be there sooner than you think, God willing. And then we'll see if they're full of anything but hot air. God's way is not a matter of mere talk. It's an empowered life. So how should I prepare to come to you? As a severe disciplinarian who makes you toe the mark? Or as a good friend and counsellor who wants to share heart to heart with you? You decide. You've probably got the picture by now. Paul is pretty cheesed off with the bickering church of Corinth. He wants them to get their focus right, to realise that Jesus is the treasure they have access to, instead of the very human and fallible and flawed teachers and leaders they're trying to put on pedestals. What he wants them to recognise is that a good leader will be a good follower. Those who are great godly leaders have learnt to humbly follow their great God. Follow him through hardships and persecution and sacrifice, perhaps even to death. And most of all, Paul wants them to recognise Jesus himself. Jesus living in Paul and in Apollos and in Peter. Not wanting them instead to elevate Paul and Apollos and Peter to a higher level than Jesus himself. What he's saying is, spot the leader. You can tell a true Christian leader by the presence of Jesus Christ in them. Other versions of our reading, perhaps one you've got in front of you, use the picture of a triumphal procession. The victorious army returns to its homeland with the spoils of war. And at the back, cramped together in a wagon, bedraggled and frightened, are the prisoners of war, condemned to die. And Paul's saying he felt like those prisoners, suffering, persecuted, made a laughing stock, or worse, victims of ridicule, humiliation and abuse. He and his fellow leaders had suffered so much to bring the message of Jesus to Corinth and the rest of the world. This Palm Sunday, we're gathered remembering another triumphant procession. No sign of the spoils of war, of treasures grabbed from the enemy, and no signs of prisoners of war. Instead, we see the leader, the victor, Jesus himself, riding a donkey. Not a great white stallion. Riding humbly on a donkey, he shows himself to be a different kind of leader, a true servant leader. And this isn't just for show. Not some kind of false humility we sometimes see from politicians or celebrities. The people of Corinth and the people of Jerusalem expected their leaders to revel in the status, to be proud, to proclaim their greatness at every opportunity. just as we today offer red carpets and larger seats, priority services to those who've made it to greatness. They expected their leaders to be born in style, to have an impressive personal profile, to be revered by other leaders and accompanied by the great and the good. And yet Jesus was welcomed into the world by shepherds. And yet Jesus had nowhere to lay his head. And yet Jesus rode into town on a donkey. And yet Jesus stood up from the table and took up a towel and washed his disciples' feet. And yet Jesus refused to stop loving his enemies. And yet Jesus held back from defending his innocence. And yet Jesus, stripped of his robes, died the death of a slave, was buried in a borrowed tomb. This is the servant king who loves us that much that he would die for us. Let's hear about him from Philippians chapter 2. He had equal status with God, but didn't think so much of himself that he had to cling to the advantages of that status no matter what. Not at all. When the time came, he set aside the privileges of deity and took on the status of a slave, became human. Having become human, he stayed human. It was an incredibly humbling process. He didn't claim special privileges. Instead, he lived a selfless, obedient life, and then died a selfless, obedient death. And the worst kind of death at that, a crucifixion. So, this is what Paul is getting at. Human leaders need to reflect their divine leader, Jesus, the God-man. Not be puffed up with pride or inflated by ego. They need to lead from their soul, not from their status. They must be servants of the people they lead. And Christians everywhere need to stop putting people on pedestals, whether it's the leaders you're stuck with or the ones you wished you had. Stop missing the real deal and put Jesus on the throne he deserves. Have you done that? This Palm Sunday, are you with the crowds who cheer Jesus on, thinking he's come to overthrow the Roman occupation, recognizing something in him, but not really understanding? That crowd turned as soon as they realized that he wasn't going to be the military leader they were expecting. They turned to chanting, "Crucify him, crucify him." Have you thought Jesus was a good man, but perhaps not recognized him for who he truly is, God on earth, here because he loves you so much, dying because he loves you so much, and rising again because he is God, because he is conqueror, because he is the victor? If you think God is nudging you somehow to do this, then join in this prayer with me. Jesus, I've not realized properly who you are before now. I've put all sorts of things on pedestals, ambition and success, material possessions and social status, my needs above all else. Now I recognize you for the first time. You are the Saviour I've been waiting for. I just didn't realize it. And I accept you now as my true King. I'm sorry for the way in which I've disobeyed you, the way in which I have put other things on pedestals. And Lord, I open my life to you. Come in and make yourself at home. Come in and take control of my life. And some of us, Lord, are guilty of letting religious or church trappings get in the way. So much so that we can't see you because of all that clutter. As we continue in this time of physical confinement, help us to use it to get a clear new perspective, one with you, Jesus, at the very centre. Amen. Can I encourage you, if you feel that you want to talk to someone about something you've heard in this talk or any other talk on our website, please feel free to get in touch with one of the clergy, or some of our other colleagues would also be pleased to talk to you. So please contact us via the church office. In the meantime, God bless you, and let's look forward to Easter Sunday next week.